Glad you could join us for today's program. Before we get started, I want to spend a few moments on a few technical notes. There are two options for sound. One, computer speakers, and two, telephone. We have all participants on mute to minimize background noise. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the session, but please feel free to type in your questions into the chat or questions field on your screen as we go, and we will make every attempt to address those questions as we move forward. We will be recording the webinar for sharing later. And so I will now pause for a moment, count to 3, and then reintroduce the webinar. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to NC3T's Brown Bag Webinar Series. This is Tom Sudworth from the National Center for College and Career Transitions, and I will be facilitating today's session. Today's webinar is entitled Building Advisory Boards That Work for You. A little bit about NC3T. NC3T is a mission-driven organization focused on helping states, school districts, post-secondary education, and workforce partners develop college and career pathway systems. We provide technical assistance, coaching, and consulting services. We have some printed resources available. The first two can be purchased through the NC3T website under the Resources tab. The Employer Engagement Toolkit, which is practical advice on how to establish and maintain effective business and industry partnerships. And the STEM Leader Guide, and that is how to build a STEM culture in your school. Building Advisory Boards That Matter. This book will help create an advisory board that helps you steer your program, build capacity, pull in new resources and expertise, and provide students and staff with opportunities they could never realize otherwise. I'm going to introduce you now to our presenter, Brett Pawlowski. Brett, introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, this is Brett Pawlowski. I'm joining you today from Charlotte, North Carolina, where spring is in full bloom and everything is about to turn yellow thanks to all the plentiful pollen that we tend to have here in the South. So I hope you guys are all starting to get some warm weather and gearing up for spring. Just a few words about myself. I've been working on employer engagement, on business education partnerships for about 15 years now, and two of the resources that Tom just mentioned, Building Advisory Boards That Matter, that's a resource that I co-authored with Hans Meter, co-founder of NC3T, and the Employer Engagement Toolkit, which was co-authored with Charlie Katz, who is a partnership consultant who is formerly with the National Academy Foundation. This is a field that I believe deeply in. I think in terms of improving student outcomes and providing students with real-world experiences, I think that employer engagement is probably one of the most important things that we can do, doubly so within a CTE environment. And as we come together today to talk about advisory boards, to me, advisory boards provide the single greatest return on investment for the time that you put in. If you build a strong advisory board, if you've got it running effectively, that can provide outsized returns for your program. So I think it's an important topic, and I appreciate you all joining to talk about this today. I'd like to start off with an introductory question. Are all of your advisory board members still alive? Are you sure? Do you know that all of your advisory board members are still with you? And the reason that we lead with that question is because when Hans and I were writing the advisory board book for ACTE, we interviewed somebody who had recently moved into a district level administrative job and found out when he was tasked with revitalizing their board that many of his board members, at least the people on his list, were in no position to advise anybody. Many of them had passed away, and so he was really starting from scratch, and it's sort of indicative of what happens in districts or in schools where advisory boards are looked at as sort of an obligation, and it's something that you try to do the minimum of, and usually in a situation like that, you end up getting very little out of it. So we're going to talk about a few things today. The first is why have an advisory board? Try to answer that question that I just posed of, if you just put the minimum effort into it, you're going to get the minimum, but what if you do more? What can you get from an advisory board if you invest more effort into it? The next question is how to build an advisory board. What are the steps to finding the right people, putting them in the right places, and assigning roles? And finally, we'll talk about advisory board operations. Once you've got your board in place, what do you do with them on a day-to-day or year-to-year basis that produces real results, results that make an impact on your school, on your program, on your teachers, and on your students? So why have an advisory board? A lot of people think that boards are actually mandated by the Perkins Act, which is the act that governs much of what happens in career and technical education. In reality, Perkins does not actually require advisory boards. They certainly encourage it. It's one of the allowable uses of funds, but it is not required in the current version of Perkins. Now, there's talk, a lot of talk recently about passing a new version of Perkins, and I would expect that advisory boards will be mandated in the new federal legislation, but currently it's not mandated at a federal level. Many states, however, in fact, I would guess that most states require programs to operate advisory boards based on some minimum criteria, maybe 2 meetings a year, meetings on site, hourly meetings, with a certain minimum number of topics to be discussed. But there are a lot of reasons to invest in your advisory board, a lot of benefits that you and your students can receive. The first is relevance. It helps you focus on the right outcomes. It connects you to the industry that you are aligned with, helps you find out what's happening currently in the field, what real-world expectations are, what they're looking for in terms of soft skills, technical skills, academic skills, allows you to find out where the growth opportunities are, that sort of thing. It brings training expertise to the table in the sense that a lot of the people, assuming you've got good business representation on your board, these are people who are responsible for training their current staff on current practices and can lend that expertise to you and sometimes even lend resources to you. Some people, although I have to say I haven't seen a lot of this, but I think some boards can participate in the interview process as you bring in new educators and administrators. If you've got people with real-world experience coming in from the field, it brings a really valuable perspective as you're interviewing people for positions to prepare kids for the work world. Securing resources, I think, is a critical component of a strong advisory board. If you've got business partners who are there to advise you, who feel bought into the program, who see the relevance of the work that you're doing, these are the people, and it's actually, in a lot of cases, made explicit in bringing board members to the table. These are the people who can find internship slots. They can find equipment and resources and funding for CTSO competitions and all sorts of whatever sorts of resources you need to fund your program, to fuel your work. That is one of the core functions of your advisory board, the smaller group of business people who are truly dedicated to the work you're doing. That is one of their core functions. Advisory boards can connect you with a larger community. A lot of times we say that advisory boards provide a window for the business community into your program and a window for your program into the business community. And a lot of your business partners will be able to tell you what's happening in the community, in the business community. They'll be able to go out and connect you with the right people, again, because if you're looking for internship slots or what have you, they've got their own Rolodexes. They're involved in chambers of commerce or economic development groups. They can connect you with the people who you need to reach, but you may not currently know. And finally, advocacy, which I think is sometimes overlooked, but I think it's a critical component, because business partners, realistically speaking, they're in a position to say things that you may not be able to say for legal reasons or just for decorum, and they may have the ears of people who you otherwise may not be able to reach. So I think advocacy for people who feel bought into your program is a very important thing to consider. We had one quote from someone also from the Building Advisory Boards That Matter book, Robin White with Great Oaks in Cincinnati, who talked about a bond issuance that they had, and one of their board members had several trucks that were driving around the city all day long. He put magnetic signs on all of his trucks to say, vote yes on this levy. And they couldn't do it. They obviously can't promote the bond issuance themselves. He was under no such restrictions. He had the trucks. He made the signs. It was a critical component to their campaign to get the bond issuance passed. So if you're looking to start a committee, and I'll preface by saying there's really no one right way to set up an advisory committee. Everyone has a different situation. They're facing different circumstances. They have different needs and different priorities. So you may decide to have a single advisory board that handles every function. You may have a core group of your board leadership, your strategic executive board, and multiple committees that are all focused on specific objectives. So there's no one right way to do it. But some of the functions that you might want to consider, whether those are committee structure, committee functions, or just things that are covered by your overall board. The first is to have that core leadership group, the core management group. You'll want a regional industry sector committee. And this is a group, it's got sort of a very broad focus. They're looking regionally around your community. They're looking at multiple industries. They're basically there to keep their finger on the pulse of what's happening in industry as it may relate to the preparation of your students. But again, it's a very sort of broad-based, just keeping an eye out for what's coming down the pike and that sort of thing. You'll want a program advisory committee, which is more hands-on to the structure and effectiveness and the processes of your program. You'll want to consider looking at an occupational or an industry advisory committee. And this is distinct from the regional industry sector committee in the sense that it's very tactical. And you're looking at trying to get information on very program-specific things. You're trying to find out for the industry that you're aligned with what skill sets they're looking for, who specifically is hiring and may have intern opportunities. So it's very much hands-on and much more tactical than that broad-based, 30,000-foot view industry sector group. And again, one of the things that you're trying to accomplish with your program, you may want to look at other subcommittees. And these could be permanent committees, they could be temporary task forces or what have you. But a lot of programs look for articulation agreements and dual enrollment options. This may involve developing relationships with post-secondary partners or with secondary partners if you're with a post-secondary institution. A lot of programs are concerned about recruitment, finding students, because you may not be part of the general public environment. This may be a program of choice or a school of choice, such as some of the standalone tech schools. So recruitment, outreach, that sort of thing are very important. Talent development for your teachers or for your administrators. You want to be sure that people are staying current and developing the skills that they need to stay current and to grow. Facilities and equipment, especially if you're growing, if you're in need of larger capital investments to keep your labs or what have you current. Communications and advocacy, again, another core function to reach out not only to recruit students and business partners, but just to let the community know what it is that you're doing. And finally, program accreditation, which is applicable to some, but not always to all. In terms of advisory board structures, the only other thing that I would suggest is that, especially in a lot of places, and it's funny, the circumstances where this is appropriate are surprisingly large. You may want to consider sharing an advisory board with others if you are in a very rural district or community where there may not be a lot of business participation or a lot of potential board members. You might be able to share an advisory board with another school or with a post-secondary institution. Also in a highly populated urban area where you may have schools almost on top of one another and you're all asking business partners to sit on your board, and you end up with a business person who sits on 5 different boards and has to say the same thing 5 different times. In a case like that, it makes a lot of sense to share an advisory board. So we're going to start with a polling question. And Kathy, I'll ask you to start the poll. When you think about the benefits that your advisory board offers or could offer, just out of curiosity for the people on this webinar, are you only doing the minimum that your state requires? Are you meeting the minimal amount of times, or are you doing more? So we'll leave this open for just a minute. And Tom and Kathy, I don't know if there are any other instructions I need to provide people. It looks like people are actually answering the poll as we speak.
Right. I don't know if you can see the percentages, but we have about 65% of the people have voted. Right now we have 41% saying yes, 59% saying no.
Okay.
About 75% have voted now.
Okay, so what we're saying is that 40% of the people participating on the webinar meet more often than their state requires. Okay, that's actually pretty helpful, and I was going to guess that it would be about 50-50. So this isn't a huge surprise. A lot of people probably don't do more than the state requires, just because there are so many competing interests on the part of educators and administrators. There's so many things we have to do that if you don't have a clear sense of the benefits and the clear sense of the outcomes, that it's easy just to do the minimum to meet Perkins requirements or your state requirements. So this is certainly understandable. I think one of the recurring themes of this presentation is just the thought that you get out of something what you put into it. And so if you're going to do the minimum with advisory boards, you probably won't get a tremendous amount of value beyond the state compliance. But if you put more into it, then there's a real opportunity to receive the sorts of benefits that we talked about previously. So we'll go ahead and close that poll, and we'll go on to the next stage of the webinar, which is building your advisory board. Now you want to think about, if you're going to build an effective advisory board, what sorts of people do you want around the table? What sorts of contributions do you want them to be able to make? And these are some of the key things that you want to look for in prospective advisory boards. Now, not every person is going to be able to offer all of these things. What you want to do is find a mix of people who offer different sort of assets that they can bring to the table. You want to find people who are well connected within your region, particularly within the business community, maybe through sector groups or chambers of commerce or that sort of thing. You want people who aren't so connected to your program that they have sort of an independent eye towards what it is that you're doing. You want people who can serve that advocacy role, who can go out and talk to business people and parents and post-secondary partners, and sometimes even internal audiences like your administrators or your district leadership, to let them know what's happening with your program, the positive outcomes that are being generated. You want people with a strong business background who can offer an oversight function, not only in terms of student outcomes, but also in terms of management and structure. Somebody with that business management experience who can help look at what you're doing. And you want to be sure you have people who have a strong enough sense of the current and future workforce, to be able to make sure that the work you're doing now connects to the realities of the workplace, what people are looking for, but also to think sort of 3 to 5 years down the road to make sure, because it takes a while to retool a program, to make sure that you know what's coming in 3 to 5 years, whether that's new businesses moving in or major changes in the industry. So you've got an opportunity to prepare and work now to be prepared as those changes take place. Now, what kinds of people specifically do you want on your board? You certainly want some of the larger, more established employers, the people who are going to be doing the bulk of the hiring of your students. You also want some of the smaller, more entrepreneurial companies. My partner Hans Meter calls them gazelle companies because they're the fast-moving, spry kind of companies. They tend to be more innovative. They may not be hiring huge numbers of people, but they're sort of on the cutting edge of your industry. So it's good to see what they're working on, and so you get a sense of where the larger companies may be going in 2 or 3 years. It's good to have post-secondary or secondary representation to make sure that your program is aligned to the next educational step in an academic career. If your industry has strong trade union representation, such as the skilled trades, for example, you'll want union reps at the table. And sort of calling on what we talked about on the last slide, you want at least one senior executive with strong business management and ideally board management experience, because you want somebody to make sure that you've got a business partner who is sort of leading the charge on managing the board and guiding the board. Some other people you want to consider are people from your business coalitions, like chambers of commerce. These people tend to be very well connected, and as you go out looking for resources, mentors, internship slots, people to work at a job fair, those sorts of things, they've got the Rolodex that you need. And maybe the younger people on the webinar don't even know what a Rolodex is, but if you're well connected, that's what we're talking about. You want people, if you've got specific goals for the year, say that you've got a goal to substantially increase your outreach or presence in the community. You may want somebody with media experience, web design, social media, that sort of thing. Some people look at having past students on the board, people who have gone through your program, people who are working in the field, or it could be the parents as long as they're working in the field. We actually did a workshop this weekend, and we had one school where they had very strong parent representation on the board because you're not going to find people who care more about the student outcomes than the parents. And you might also want professional associations. So these are, again, your trade associations. If you've got representation in the community, it may be good to have them on the board as well. 2 types that you may want to avoid. One are your entrepreneurs who are there more to promote themselves than to support your program. There may be some who want to advertise what they're doing. They may want to eventually reach your other board members to try to sell them. Those are people who are not working in your best interests. They're working in their own interests, so try to avoid those folks. And a lot of advisory board members have staff on the advisory board. And it's an iffy question because sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it can shut down dialogue. If staff, and I think it's a natural feeling to maybe start to feel defensive if somebody starts to offer a critique of what's happening. But if you've got people who can speak professionally with industry reps, if they are not defensive, if they truly understand that this is a collaborative effort, that everyone's working towards the same goal, and if they're going to be collaborative in that process, I think it's fine to have them. But if you're worried about people being defensive, not being able to speak fluently, sort of that business talk, it may not be good to have them on the board. In the Employer Engagement Toolkit, we suggest this breakdown, and this comes from Charlie Katz. I believe this is the work of the National Academy Foundation, to say that you want 3/4 of your board members to be business people. Maybe 15% school-based, 5% from the community. Those could be your parents or civic leaders, and maybe 1 or 2 people from the post-secondary community, assuming you're a secondary level program. But the 3 out of 4 people should be business partners. Now, just on a personal level, just the personal characteristics that you want in a board member, a lot of these I think are common sense. You want people who have the time to devote to your program, you want people with good interpersonal skills, good business network, thorough understanding of the field. When we say fills one of 3 key roles, you want some people who are thinkers, sort of the big picture visionaries. You want some people who are managers, people who know how to execute and manage an initiative, maybe one of your committees or something. And you want a lot of people who are doers, who are actually going to jump in, roll up their sleeves, and actually get things done. So those, when we talk about the 3 key roles, those are the roles that we're talking about. Now, where to find members? This is, we could talk for an hour on this. We actually have a standard how to find business partners presentation that talks about how to find people. But I think just very briefly, when you talk to educators and administrators, one of the first sort of instinctual responses is, I don't know anybody. I don't have the connections. And the reality is we all have a lot of relationships that we can tap into. We can talk to fellow educators at the school and the district level, both in the CTE and sort of in the general education space. Let them know we're looking for partners. We can talk to our vendors. I mean, if you're buying supplies, say that you're a culinary program, you're buying food, that same vendor probably supplies a lot of the businesses in your area. Talk to your vendors. Talk to your parents. Talk to your former students. Talk to the people in your personal networks. If you belong to a church or a bowling league or the Lions Club, don't be shy about reaching out and letting everyone you know about your needs and that you're looking for partners and what you're doing and that there are opportunities with the advisory board to make sure that your program is aligned with the realities of the workplace. Established professional networks, I think, are extremely important, whether that's a local sector group or regional sector group or your chamber of commerce, anywhere that business people convene to talk about work in your field. That's someplace you should be. That's an organization you should join, and not only join, but attend. You know, go there on a regular basis. Joining and just sending in a check once a year for your membership, that doesn't get you the relationships you need. You need to get engaged. Serve on committees. Ask if you can host the chamber meeting on site so you can offer a tour of your program. Try to get involved, and also ask the people who run the network to help you connect with the people that you need to talk to. Now, in terms of making that ask, I did a survey several years ago of business coalitions and business coalitions being chambers of commerce, workforce investment boards, EDCs, the economic development corporations, to find out how they work with schools. And I asked a lot of different questions, and 2 of the questions, the first here is, what kind of outcomes are you interested in when you work with schools? And far and away, workforce preparedness was their top interest. That's what business people are most interested in when they work with schools. Another question we asked is, how do you want to work with schools? And providing expertise, again, far and away of greater interest than any of the other options. And so when you're asking people to serve on your advisory board that is focused on workforce preparedness, is a venue for them to provide their expertise to your program, this is absolutely the sweet spot of where your business partners want to be. So when you're approaching business partners to talk about the advisory board, just understand that this is a great opportunity for them. If they're going to be involved in schools, this is exactly where they want to be. So don't hesitate to make that ask when you find the right people. And so when you make that ask, make sure that you talk about the importance of your work. It's also important to talk about your successes. I think it's very easy to talk about your needs and your challenges, but people want to be part of a winning team. They want to join something that's got momentum. And so talk about the work you're doing. Talk about your successes. That's what people want to be involved in. When you talk about joining the advisory board, make sure that you've got a written description of the role. This is a situation where you want to be sure that there are no misunderstandings down the road. So in 3 months, people say, I didn't realize that I had to attend quarterly meetings, or I didn't realize that I was going to be on monthly calls. Make sure they understand what they're getting into. And even if it's a little scary, a little daunting, depending on what you're asking, make sure they know that up front. And so you know the people who sign on are signing on with both eyes open. Make an effort to get to know them. Visit their place of work. And sometimes you'll talk to educators who feel that they don't have the time to do that. But the thing is, you're asking these people to give up a lot of their time and sacrifice their time. So I think you need to be able to make a similar sacrifice. Go get to know them. Understand what they do. It's a great opportunity to learn what's happening in their workplace. It's information that you can bring back to the classroom. So I think beyond the advisory board ask, I think it's valuable information and well worth doing. Make the offer. Specifically ask, will you serve on the advisory board? Specify the benefits. And I don't think there are any programs out there that can actually offer cash compensation, but you can talk about the benefits in terms of skills development and networking with other people in the field. Making an impact on student outcomes, boosting the strength of the local workforce. There are a lot of benefits and a lot of very attractive reasons to join an advisory board. And finally, if you can go with your committee chair or another leader, some business representation who's already involved in your program, that just brings more weight to the table and well worth doing. And finally, in terms of setting expectations, more specifically, we're talking about the terms of service. And there are boards out there that have an unlimited term of service and some that say you can serve for 3 years and no more, maybe with one renewable 3-year period. I've talked to more than a few advisory boards where they feel like they've got some people who have been on there for 15, 20 years who are just joiners. They like the board, and they like to come and feel involved, but they're so disconnected from industry at this point, maybe they're retired, that they're not bringing value. So find a way to limit terms of service and let your prospective board members know how long you're expecting them to serve. Let them know in terms of meeting preparedness, when they're going to get materials for the agenda. Try to make a good practice of sending out materials at least a week prior. Any background information that they need, make sure that they've got that well before the meeting. Let them know how often the meetings are, and ideally, because business people set their schedules, their calendars so far in advance, try to map out the whole year and let them know the months and dates of your meetings throughout the year. Every other month on Tuesday at 8:30 in the morning. Let them know that. Let them know if there's an expectation for special meetings. If you're in some sort of a crisis mode, or if you've got the regular meetings, but also the committees meet on a regular basis. If there's an annual retreat for planning, that would be a special meeting. Let them know if you expect them, as a condition of joining the board, to provide some sort of resources, whether those are internship slots or volunteers or financial support. You may not have that at all, but if you do, make sure that they understand it upfront going in. And finally, again, very few boards that I'm familiar with, probably really none that I've seen, offer any sort of real compensation. But if there is, let them know, and if there's not, be sure they understand that as well. So we're going to run one more poll question, and we talked about best practice being 75% of your board consisting of business representation. And so this poll will be, on your current board, do business representatives make up 50% or more of your board? It looks like the numbers are jumping all over the place. So I'm sure we'll settle into to a good number here. All right, so with 65% of the vote counted, it looks like, oh, and there we go up to 70%. So it looks like 60% of you say that business representatives make up the majority of your board, which I think is good. Again, that best practice, you want to look for 75%, but if you've got the majority coming from industry, I think that's pretty encouraging. So we'll go ahead and close that poll. I know we've got about 10 minutes left in the webinar, so we'll just go fairly quickly through the last bit because I want to be sure that we have time for any questions. And we'll just talk briefly about board operations. In this first question, and this is one that came from Hans Meter. I want to give Hans credit for this because I think it's a brilliant question. Who owns your board? Because a lot of times you may have strong business representation on the board. You may even have business leaders in some of the key slots, your chair, your vice chair, that sort of thing. But in reality, a lot of times it's the school leaders who are actually running the board. The school leaders are setting the agenda, they're inviting people, they're recruiting new board members, they're running the meetings, they're setting the goals, and your business people, they're participating, but they're just sort of sitting there. They don't feel ownership of the board. And in the programs that I have seen, and I've heard this from others as well, the programs that I have seen where you've got a business person serving as chair and they own the board. They're the ones working with you to set annual goals. They're the ones out there representing your program in the community, recruiting board members, setting the agenda, actually running the meetings. I think that is the single best indicator of a successful and effective advisory board. So if you can find that business person who's ready to lead the board, has the skills and the connections and the interest and the availability to do so, that is probably the single best thing you can do. And I understand the concerns of some educators to give up control, but I think we need to keep in mind that this is truly an advisory board. These people, even though they may be running the board itself, they have no power to single-handedly change the program itself. But they're just running the advisory board. And so just remember that it's an advisory role. There's really not that much of a loss of control in the situation. So just functionally, and a lot of this stuff, if you've seen Building Advisory Boards That Matter or the Employer Engagement Toolkit, a lot of this functional content, you do want to have a formal board structure with a chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer with formally defined roles. And again, as those people are recruited for these positions, make sure that those roles are defined in writing so that they can sign off on that. You want to make sure that each year you're setting goals, that the board knows why it's there, what they're trying to accomplish, that they have the authority to set the committee structure or the board structure to achieve the goals that you guys have set, that you outline your operations, how the board runs, and that you set a calendar so people know well in advance when things are going to take place. Every board meeting has the potential to be different. I mean, a lot of times you may have sort of a stock agenda that is a starting point, but it should vary based on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. You want to have an opportunity for people to report on their progress towards annual goals. If you have defined any metrics for success for the board or for the school or for the students, you want to share those on a regular basis so people have a sense of your forward momentum. You want to remind people of upcoming deadlines, any changes in the program, reports. Again, if we have those sector committees or industry committees, we want to give people a chance to share what's happening in the field. And one of the things that's not on here but I think is really, really important is make sure that you've got a time to put problems on the table. So don't make it a horse and pony show, or I don't know the expression, it's horse and pony or dog and pony. I don't know, some people say one and the other. But if you just make it a happy occasion and everything is going great and just sit here and watch and hear about all we're doing, you're really missing one of the core values that an advisory board can bring. And that is to tap into the expertise of all the people around the table and have them help you solve your challenges. So be upfront and honest and say, you know, we're having a challenge with recruiting. or we don't know which way to go on certifications, or we're having trouble in this area. We're getting trounced in CTSO competitions. Put problems on the table and let people try to solve those. That's why they're there. That's what they want to be doing. They want to contribute that expertise, and if you can put those problems on the table, they can share their expertise, help you solve the challenges that you're facing. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And finally, try to tie everything back into the big picture. Set the clear expectations. Make sure people have information well in advance of having to make any decisions or informed discussions. Make sure that you've got standards for how your group operates. You want to be sure that it's civil, that conversations are effective. You may have time limits, that sort of thing. Try not to do that sort of thing on the fly. Be accountable and focus on the return on your investment. Make sure that what it is that you're putting into the board and what your board members are putting into the program is generating returns for everyone. And so we were going to talk a few minutes about the strategic review. I think given the interest of time, understand that it's important to meet ideally off-site once a year, look at what you're doing, and have those big picture discussions of where you want to be. Next year, 3 years, 5 years, and try to step back when you get a chance and just figure out where you want to go and have that big picture discussion on occasion. That really helps set the focus of your program and your board. So I think with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Thanks, Brett. I'd like to remind everyone to type your questions into the either the question box or the chat box to the on your screen. I do have one question that was asked. What types of business people do you recommend on each type of committee? For example, executive leadership versus human resources.
I think you want to find the people with expertise in whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So for example, if you've got a committee focused on recruiting and outreach, you want to find people with very strong skill sets in those areas. For your strategic leadership team, you want to find, I guess the term is sort of euphemistically the seasoned professional, the people who have been around long enough to understand how business works, understand truly the pipeline. They've been around long enough to have developed the relationships that you'll want them to be able to tap into. So I would really just look to their specific areas of expertise lined up against what you're really trying to accomplish.
What about, Brett, if you've got, you feel like you've got the right people in the right seats on the board and they're just not getting engaged?
You know, the best thing you can do, I would say two things. The first is to ask, because a lot of times you'll see advisory board meetings that are really, again, those sort of extended presentations. You know, let us tell you about our programs. We've got students coming in to give a presentation. Maybe we just hired this new teacher. Isn't she great? Isn't he great? And there's really no opportunity for business people to get involved. We're not asking them to do anything. So the first thing is to ask. Put out your challenges. Work with them collaboratively to decide where you want to go, and ask. Ask for help. And I think the other is just on a structural basis to give them authority, because to have responsibility without having authority, we've probably all had jobs like that, and it really stinks. So make sure that your board leadership, if you're putting business people into those roles, make sure that they understand that they've got authority to go out and speak on your behalf, to work with you collaboratively to set goals, that they're involved, and make sure that they've got some authority and responsibility. So I think those would be my two suggestions.
One final question, Brett. What suggestions do you have for ensuring educators are open to suggestions from advisory board members and accountable for actions based on recommendations?
That is a really good question, because I think, again, if we're talking about your advisory board members trying to make your program as effective as possible, as well aligned to industry as possible, I think that there's a natural concern on the part of educators that you're second guessing what it is that they're doing. And I think whether you have educators on the board or not, and that I think is a program-to-program decision and based partly on personnel, I think one of the best things you can do is find as many opportunities for your business partners and your educators to work together. Whether that is having your business partners, your advisory board members, also take on some volunteer roles, come in as guest speakers, that sort of thing. If you can have your board members invite your educators to their companies, whether that's just a one-day visit or a 2-week summer externship, have them build those relationships and get to know one another, because I think that's where trust comes from, and that's where you're going to start to reduce the concerns on the part of your educators that this external group that I've never talked to, they're talking about our program, they're talking about changing our program, they don't really know what we're facing, and they're just from on high throwing suggestions at us. So I think it's the personal relationships, which is so much of what's important in education anyway.
Thanks, Brett. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and we've still got a few more questions. Can the questions be emailed to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Thanks so much, Brett Pawlowski from NC3T. As you can see, Brett's email address is on the screen there. We hope you've enjoyed today's session, and we encourage you to join us for our upcoming webinar in April. And it's going to be a spotlight on Nashville's K-12 Career Development and School Counseling Program, and that is April 20th from 1 to 1:45. And you can register on the homepage of our website or in the follow-up email that we will send you. Finally, we'd like to keep improving, and so we would appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. Please fill out brief survey questions, a 7-question survey that you will receive. We would much appreciate that. And thanks so much to all of you for attending our webinar.